The cruelest punishment you can inflict on someone who took you for granted is not anger. It isn't confrontation. It isn't even revenge. It is absence. Complete, total, irreversible absence. No explanation, no warning, no trace. You simply stop existing in their world. And what follows inside their mind is something they will never openly admit. Something that stays with them during quiet moments, returning again and again. It resurfaces every time they see someone who moves like you, laughs like you, or vanishes in a way you never did before. Machiavelli understood something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. He knew power is not about what you say, but about what you withhold. It is not about constant presence, but about deliberate absence. The person who can disappear without hesitation controls the entire psychological field without ever engaging directly. This video breaks down the 7 stages of psychological pressure that unfold inside someone's mind when you simply disappear. Not when you argue. Not when you plead for attention. Not when you demand appreciation. But when you vanish. By the end, you will understand why the most damaging thing you can do to someone who underestimated you is to become a presence they can no longer reach, yet cannot stop thinking about. What I will not explain yet is the 7th stage. The final one. It is rarely discussed and deeply unsettling. It is the moment they discover something about themselves that alters them permanently. We will get there. But first, you need to understand the structure of psychological breakdown. Stage 1. The shock of non-existence. When you disappear, the first emotion they experience is not sadness. It is not regret. It is confusion. You disrupt the internal pattern of their reality. People do not value others simply because they are present. They value consistency, reliability, and predictability. Your attention became expected. Your availability became assumed. You turned into a constant in their mental equation. And constants are not respected, they are taken for granted. When you vanish, you do not just remove yourself. You remove a supporting structure in their psychological system. Their mind was operating on the belief that you would always respond, always be accessible, always absorb disorder without consequence. When that belief collapses, the system fails. Machiavelli wrote that people are often driven by immediate needs and simple assumptions, making them easy to mislead. But he also understood that once deception ends, once the dependable presence removes itself, the person who relied on it is left facing an emptiness they never prepared for. They assumed you would always remain because you always had. And now, you do not. This is not grief. Not yet. This is something more basic. It is the confusion of someone entering a familiar space expecting something essential, only to find nothing there. They reach for you out of habit. They check their phone. They open the conversation. They expect a response at any moment. But it never comes. The silence settles in, constant and unavoidable. This shock does not arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly, and that is what makes it powerful. It begins quietly. It settles into brief moments. The empty chair, the message that never arrives, the name that no longer shows up. They don't understand yet what is happening. They only sense that something is missing, something foundational, and that missing piece is you. Let them experience it. Let the silence communicate before you say another word. 2. The internal interrogation. Once the initial shock fades, the questions start. And they don't arrive gently. They show up at 2 a.m., when the world is still and distractions are gone. They surface in the middle of conversations when someone mentions your name and their stomach tightens. They come without order, without restraint, without answers. What happened? Did I do something wrong? Why won't they reply? Are they okay? Are they with someone else? Did they ever truly care about me? This is the stage where their mind turns into a courtroom. And they play both roles, prosecutor and defendant. They replay every exchange, every small dismissal, every moment they overlooked you, every time they chose ease over effort. And here is the truth they won't openly admit: they never expected you to have boundaries. You were meant to be endless, always available, a source of patience they could return to whenever they wanted. But sources run dry when they are ignored. Now they are staring at an empty space, wondering when it happened, how it happened, and why they failed to notice. This questioning has no end because there is no resolution. No trial, no verdict, no closure. Only a loop of unanswered possibilities repeating in their thoughts. Machiavelli observed that the first way to judge the intelligence of a ruler is by the people he keeps around him. But what happens when a ruler wakes up and those people are gone? When the court is empty and the throne room echoes only with his own steps, he begins to question whether he ever earned the crown. This is what is happening inside them now. Not consciously, not aloud, but beneath the surface. The interrogation has begun, and it will continue until it finds someone to blame. And they are starting to realize that person may be themselves. 3. The hunger for resolution. Human beings cannot tolerate unfinished loops. This psychological principle is stronger than most people realize. When a story begins, the mind demands an ending. When a question is asked, the brain seeks an answer. And when someone central to your emotional structure disappears without explanation, the mind works overtime to close the gap. This is the third stage: hunger. They don't reach for you directly. Instead, they search for information that might explain your silence. They scan your social media for hints. They reread your last message, looking for hidden meaning. They casually ask mutual friends, careful not to appear too invested, whether they've heard from you. And this is where the balance of power shifts. Every unanswered question becomes a hook in their mind. Every unknown detail turns into an obsession they can't release. The less you offer, the deeper those hooks settle. Machiavelli understood that the wise act immediately, while fools act too late. But when a fool desperately wants closure and the wise response is silence, the fool unravels. They fixate. They surrender control without realizing it. They need resolution as much as air, and you are giving them none. That lack of resolution creates psychological pressure that builds without relief. This hunger isn't always romantic. It's not always about wanting you back. Often, it's simply the mind's need to finish a story, to understand, to close a file and move forward. But you've denied that release. And in doing so, you remain present in their thoughts. Some believe closure is kindness. It isn't. Closure allows forgetting. When there is no closure, forgetting becomes impossible. Not because you are extraordinary, but because the loop remains open. You become an unresolved point they keep returning to. For the myth-making. When people cannot access the truth, they create a version that protects them. This is the fourth stage, and it exposes how fragile the ego can be. Faced with the unexplained absence of someone they undervalued, the mind begins constructing stories. Not to understand you, but to shield themselves. Maybe you were always unstable. Maybe you never cared as much as they thought. Maybe you did this for attention. Maybe you found someone else. Maybe you'll return asking for forgiveness. These narratives serve a purpose. They rewrite the past in a way that preserves self-image. Because the alternative, accepting that they pushed away someone meaningful through neglect, entitlement, or disregard, is too painful. So the stories begin. But myths are fragile. They require constant effort. Every time reality challenges the story, it must be adjusted, reinforced, rebuilt. That takes energy, focus, and emotional work. Without doing anything, you've taken up space in their psychology. Machiavelli wrote that people judge more with their eyes than their hands, because everyone can see, but few can truly feel. When you remove yourself from view, When you become invisible, they can neither see nor fully grasp the truth. They are left reaching for explanations, building meanings from absence, creating stories about someone who is no longer there. The irony is clear. The less you engage, the more effort they must invest to maintain the illusion. Their sense of peace depends on a fiction, and fictions eventually collapse. They will defend the story publicly. They'll say it was for the best, that they never needed you, that they're better off. But alone, when there's no audience, the narrative weakens. Beneath it, the truth presses forward. You mattered more than they admitted, and now you are gone. 5. The phantom presence. Psychologists describe a phenomenon called intrusive recall. It's when the mind brings back memories of someone without invitation, often in response to the attempt to forget them. This is the 5th stage. The stage where you exist everywhere and nowhere at once. They notice you in strangers, in familiar songs, in brief movements at the edge of their vision. They hear your voice in quiet spaces. They feel your absence most in crowded ones. You've become a presence that no longer occupies their life, but continues to shape their thoughts. And the cruelest part comes next. This stage often arrives after they believed they were finally over you. They endured the shock. They made it through the questioning phase. They fed their hunger and constructed their narratives. And then, just when they think they've moved forward, your ghost returns. It appears without warning. A scent, a phrase, a location you once shared, and suddenly the story they built begins to fracture and reality rushes back in. You were real. You existed. And now you're gone. Machiavelli spoke often about timing, about knowing when to strike and when to retreat. But what he understood, even if indirectly, was that withdrawal creates a vacuum, and vacuums demand to be filled. When you leave, something must replace you. But what happens if nothing can? What if they try to fill the space with distractions, new connections, substances, constant noise, and still feel the empty echo of your absence? That echo becomes your voice. This phantom presence is especially damaging because it cannot be controlled. They cannot decide when you surface in their mind. They cannot plan for your return. You arrive on your own terms, and they are powerless to stop it. This is the moment they realize that forgetting you is not a decision. It's a conflict. And it's one they are losing. You're not there, yet you are everywhere. That contradiction fractures their sense of peace. 6. The revaluation crisis. Every person operates on an internal system, an unconscious ledger that tracks value. Who matters, who doesn't, who deserves attention, and who can be dismissed. When you were present, you were treated as cheap currency. Abundant, accessible, always available. But once you're gone, the market corrects. This is the 6th stage, where they finally see what they had. Not through gratitude, but through loss. The value they assigned to you was wrong. The ledger was flawed. And now, in your absence, they are forced to re-examine everything. This is painful because it demands what the ego resists more than anything: admitting a mistake. They didn't just lose you. They undervalued you. They took you for granted, not because you lacked worth, but because they lacked the clarity to recognize it. That realization doesn't arrive softly. It cuts through the fog, slicing apart the stories they created and exposing what was always underneath. You were worth more, and they treated you as if you weren't. Machiavelli observed that people rarely recognize their own errors until it's too late to fix them. And by the time revaluation occurs, the market is closed. You've been withdrawn. Your stock is no longer available. They can see your value now, clearly, painfully, undeniably, but they cannot buy back in. This is the stage where regret hardens into something heavier, where a brief sting becomes a lasting ache. Because losing someone valuable is one thing. Realizing you discarded them is another. And they did. Not out of cruelty or intent, but through neglect, which can be even more damaging. Neglect is slow. Neglect is unseen. Neglect destroys without spectacle. Now they understand. But understanding changes nothing. Because you're already gone. 7. The mirror that doesn't lie. This is the stage we were always heading toward, the one they never anticipate. The one that leaves a permanent mark. After the shock, the questioning, the hunger, the myths, the phantom presence, and the revaluation, there comes a moment of stillness. A moment when the noise fades and they are left alone with the one thing they cannot escape, themselves. This is when they stop asking what happened to you and start asking what is wrong with them. Why do I keep losing people? Why do people leave? What is it about me that makes others disappear? Your absence becomes a mirror, and the reflection is not forgiving. Machiavelli wrote that a person who tries to live entirely by virtue in a world filled with corruption will eventually be destroyed. But the opposite is also true. A person who ignores virtue for too long will one day find themselves alone, surrounded by the remains of relationships they believed they controlled. Your disappearance forces them to face a truth they may have avoided for most of their life. They are the common factor in their losses. Their behavior, their patterns, their sense of entitlement have shaped a world where people eventually leave, and you are simply the latest. Or perhaps you were the one who mattered most. This mirror stage is not automatically transformation. Many people glance at the reflection and turn away. They retreat into stories again. They find new people to neglect. They repeat the cycle because change requires courage, and courage requires pain. But some linger longer than comfort allows. And in that prolonged stare, they begin to fracture, not into ruin, but into openings. Openings through which, perhaps, a different self might finally emerge. You won't be there to witness it. You've already moved on. But somewhere, in a quiet corner of their mind, your absence will remain carved like a scar. A reminder that they once had something meaningful and allowed it to slip away because they failed to value it when it mattered. There is a specific kind of power that requires no words, no confrontation, no dramatic farewell, no final message filled with anger or soaked in pain. It is the power of absence. Clean, undiluted, and irreversible. When you disappear without explanation, you leave behind something far stronger than anything you could have said. You leave behind unanswered questions. You leave behind a space that cannot be replaced. You leave behind a version of yourself that exists only in their imagination, untouched by conflict, free from pleading. You become a symbol. And symbols, by nature, do not explain themselves. Machiavelli's philosophy rests on one central idea. The one who controls perception shapes reality. By vanishing, you do something unusual. You release control over how you are perceived while taking full control of their inner world. They will recreate you in your absence. They will enlarge you. They will notice traces of you everywhere. For years, they will replay what might have been, what failed, what they overlooked. And you will be free. Free from the draining effort of proving your value to those unwilling to see it. Free from explaining your needs to people who dismiss them. Free from waiting for growth that was never coming. Your silence becomes a verdict they must face alone. Perhaps you're watching this because someone in your life has pushed you to the edge. Someone who sees you often but hasn't truly noticed you in a long time. Someone who responds with divided attention. Who appears only when it suits them. Who treats your presence like an object, useful, but ordinary. You've questioned whether it's worth continuing. Whether you should speak up, whether you should fight to be acknowledged. But consider this, the fight is often a trap. Confrontation can give them exactly what they want, a chance to minimize your concerns, justify their neglect, or keep you around with empty promises. Disappearing offers no such opening. It is final. It is precise. It removes your emotional effort entirely from their environment. And the absence you leave will communicate more clearly than any argument you could construct. Machiavelli did not promote aggression. He taught strategy. And strategy sometimes means knowing when to leave the board altogether. But this is not only about them. It is about you. When you step away from someone who underestimated you, something changes within you. A door closes that needed to close. A chapter ends that lasted far too long. And in that ending, you find something unexpected. Power. Not power over them, though that may exist, but power over yourself. Over your choices, your energy, your focus. You reclaim control of your emotional resources. You stop investing in something that yields nothing. The first days may hurt. The quiet may feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. You may doubt yourself. You may wonder if you were too severe, if they will improve, if you should reach out. Don't interrupt the silence. Let it do its work. Let the space widen. Let them experience the full weight of what they failed to appreciate. Meanwhile, you rebuild. You redirect your effort inward. You rediscover who you are without the constant drain of someone who never fully recognized you. This is not cruelty. It is correction. You are not punishing them. You are protecting yourself. And sometimes, the same action accomplishes both. They will never openly admit what your absence did to them. Their pride won't allow it. Their story requires them to appear unaffected, to tell others they've moved on, to act indifferent. But you will know. You'll know because you understand the stages now. You understand what happens when someone who was always present suddenly isn't. You understand the structure of the psychological unraveling that follows. And you'll know because, eventually, in one form or another, they will reach out. Maybe after weeks. Maybe months. Maybe years. A message. A call. A comment. An indirect signal that you crossed their mind. When that moment comes, you'll face a choice. Let them return and risk repeating the same pattern, or remain silent and allow the legend to stand. I can't decide for you. Only you know what you need, what you deserve, and what you are willing to tolerate. But this much is certain. The person who can walk away and stay away holds the advantage. Not because they lack feeling, not because they are detached, but because they've learned the hardest lesson there is. You cannot make someone value you. But you can remove yourself from those who don't. And in doing so, you discover something they never will, your own worth. If this revealed something you needed to hear, understand this is only what can be shared publicly. There are layers that can't be shown here. Dimensions of this psychological framework that go deeper than any open platform allows. Systems resist what they cannot regulate. Those layers exist beyond this space. If you're still here, you're different from most. Many left when the message became uncomfortable. You stayed. You listened. You understood. Subscribe if you haven't. And if you want access to what remains unspoken, the knowledge not meant for the general feed, click join and step into another level. You'll unlock what cannot be said openly. The material that goes where this one cannot. Most won't follow. That's intentional.